It's a quick Blackwork tutorial for beginners. That's the video. If you are an experienced cross-stitcher or you're into embroidery of any kind, then chances are you've at least heard of Blackwork. I was surprised recently to find just how many of my stitchy friends actually avoid it because they think it's way more complicated to do than it actually is. As a huge fan of Blackwork, it is on me to spread the joy, so in today's video we'll go over what Blackwork is, how to do it, and I've also designed a little practice pattern for you because I guess I'm just awesome like that. For anyone who's new to the channel, hello! My name is Michelle and I'm a proud multi-crafter who loves to make things in traditional and modern crafts alike. If you're not new to the channel, welcome back. It is good to see you again and I hope you can find at least a little bit of value in this beginner tutorial. Okay, let's just jump straight in. So, what is Blackwork? Blackwork is a form of embroidery with a super long history. Once upon a time, it was used to create decorative accents on collars and cuffs and other pieces of clothing, and traditionally it would be done in black on a white or off-white fabric, hence the name. Traditionally, Blackwork would be reversible, looking almost identical on the front and back of the work. It's delicate, it's ornate, and it could mostly be found creating floral or geometric patterns. Nowadays, like pretty much every other traditional craft, it's having a bit of a revival. Modern Blackwork can be done in any colour without judgment. Okay, yeah, there probably is somebody out there judging, but that's basically the case for everything, right? Patterns are often non-reversible, or even where they are designed to be reversible, the stitcher might choose to stitch them in a non-reversible way. More about that later. And of course, while there are still plenty of florals around, there are also modern, abstract, even pop culture patterns available. See these three very different projects of mine as an example of the variety in modern Blackwork patterns. Fun fact, would you believe that that inconceivable cell was at least 10 times more difficult to stitch than the other two combined? Looks can be very deceiving, that's all I'll say about that. You can achieve different looks and the illusion of shading in Blackwork by changing up the number of strands of floss in use or breaking up a fill pattern. For example, the top part of this sample is stitched with 2 strands, then we move to 1 strand, and then I started using only the horizontal stitches to create a sort of gradient effect. Some patterns also achieve shading by using more complex, dense fill patterns to create the shadows, and more open, airy patterns for highlights. That's generally the basics, so let's get a little bit more specific. Now, one way to learn Blackwork, which I am by no means going to stand in the way of, is to just pick up some fabric and thread and start putting stitches in whatever way makes the most sense to you. That's exactly what I did on my first ever Blackwork project, and as you can see, it is none the worse for wear. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more of a technical method, this part of the video is for you. Basically, there are 2 officially sanctioned types of stitch used in Blackwork. Backstitch, which again you may be familiar with if you are already a cross-stitcher, and double running stitch, also known as holbein stitch. We'll go over how to do each of the stitches first, and then I'll cover a bit of when you might want to choose one over the other. In the following examples, I'll be stitching on 14 count Aida fabric, but the principles apply whatever you are stitching on. Now, the main thing with backstitch is that, as you might have guessed, you're mostly stitching backwards. So let's imagine we're stitching a straight line going in this direction. You'd come up through hole 1, down through hole 2 to form the first stitch, then up at hole 3 and come backwards to go back down hole 2 to form the second stitch. From there you continue to come up at the far side of the stitch and back down at the near side. So we're stitching each stitch backwards compared to the way the actual line is going. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, please do let me know and I will try to clarify down in the comments. Now there are pros and cons to the backstitch, but I'll show you how to do double running stitch first before we compare them. For double running stitch, you will start the exact same way. Up at the beginning of your intended line, down to form the first stitch, and then up at the far side of the second stitch. But hold on to your hats, because from here we are mixing it up. Instead of forming the second stitch, we're actually skipping it for now and doing our third stitch instead. Continue like that and you have created a dashed line known as running stitch. Now to complete this line, we'll travel back and fill in the missing stitches. So come up at the left side of that last stitch and back down to complete. Running stitch one way, then running stitch back. Double running stitch. Get it? It can be a little bit tricky to get the hang of creating a straight line with double running stitch because depending exactly where the stitches lie on the return journey, they can often look wonky compared to the ones you made on the outward journey. Here's an example where it's gone horribly wrong, because on the return stitches the needle came up in different positions. To avoid this, you'll just want to be consistent with your needle placement. One method is to always bring your needle up on the top side of the previous stitch, for example. If you have a sharp needle and sharp eyes, you can instead bring your needle up in such a way to split the thread used in those outward stitches, so your new stitches are right in the middle. In my experience, this does make the cleanest line, but it's also a little bit more difficult, so whatever works for you. As you can see, in reality, it's not going to be noticeable at all unless someone is peering at your work from very close up, or say, if you're recording it for a YouTube tutorial but making a ton of mistakes because you didn't realise how difficult it would be with the camera in the way. But I digress. Now, double running stitch probably seemed a lot more complicated, right? You are not wrong, but there are some very good reasons you might choose to use it over backstitch. For starters, while they look similar on the front of your work, backstitch is very much non-reversible while double running stitch is. Backstitch makes this thick line on the back side, and depending exactly how you brought the needle up each time, it can be a real wonky mess. Now, maybe that doesn't matter because this is going to be on the back of your work and nobody will see it, but on the other hand, if you are going for a reversible finish or your fabric is particularly delicate and sheer, this just might not be a look that you want. Another consideration is that double running stitch uses significantly less thread to achieve the same thing, because backstitch is constantly doubling over itself. This might sound so frugal and absolutely stupid to mention, but honestly, some of those posh threads can be quite pricey. You don't want to waste them if you can help it. On the other hand, if you are using variegated thread, you are probably better off sticking with backstitch, unless you particularly want the harsh colour changes you would get by doing double running. Pros and cons, either way. So you'll notice that I said those were the two officially sanctioned stitches. But anecdotally, a lot of people seem to approach blackwork the same way I do, which is more of a hybrid approach, using each of those two stitches where they make most sense, and sometimes cheating a little bit to keep the flow of the project going. For example, imagine you are backstitching and you are approaching a corner. Strictly speaking, backstitch would have you bring the needle up at spot 9, which would cause the thread to stretch diagonally across this square on the back of your work and potentially show through to the other side. To avoid that, you could instead come up at spot 10 and back down at 9, then carry on backstitching from there. Now you cheated a little bit, but your thread doesn't cut that corner on the back. Hurrah! And it's not just corners either. In real life stitching, you will constantly come up against situations where it just makes more sense to fudge it slightly and continue on with your day. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes technically correct isn't the best kind of correct after all. Personally, I use backstitch a lot of the time because I just prefer it, and also the kinds of patterns that I gravitate to tend to have more in the way of outlines rather than complex fill patterns, so it just makes more sense. But even then, sometimes the line that you're stitching branches, so what do? Let's imagine we're approaching this part of the pattern from the top left. You could backstitch up to the branch point, switch to double running stitch to go up and down the branch and end up back at that same point, and then continue along in backstitch as you were. As with most things crafty, the nuts and bolts of this make it sound way more complicated than it actually is, but they can safely be ignored in favour of fun. As long as the process and the end result make you happy, stitch however you want and don't let anybody give you grief. Obvious exceptions for anybody entering a judged competition where historical accuracy is one of the criteria, but I can't imagine you're watching my beginner blackwork tutorial anyway. So you know what blackwork is, you know vaguely how to do it. It's time to look at how exactly to follow a pattern. Blackwork patterns are actually very straightforward, and again, if you are a cross-stitcher, this will be super familiar. This is the free snowflake pattern I've created for today's tutorial. You can pause the video here and go download the official PDF from the link in the video description, or let's be honest, you can probably just screen grab it from the video. Yep, I just gave you permission. Anyway, as you can see, this is drawn on a grid with the thicker blue lines representing where to stitch, and you'll have a more detailed colour key on patterns where that's relevant. Before starting to stitch a blackwork pattern, I personally find it quite useful to just give it a quick glance over and come up with a plan of attack. Do I want the finished piece to be reversible? I should probably plan a route with double running stitch. Do I not care about that and all I want to do is minimize the amount of new threads that I need to attach? I'll be looking for those places where I can safely carry thread across the back of the work without it peeking through holes. If in doubt, just start in the middle and make it up as you go along. Am I a bad influence? It feels like I'm a bad influence. First off, I'm stitching on Ada, so I know I can safely carry the thread between lines that are only 1 square apart. This applies to everything in the very middle section here, so I'd probably just start there and work my way out towards the edge, however makes the most sense at the time. I know that I'll be following one of these corner lines out, so the other 3 also need filling in. They're only 2 stitches long, so I would probably just do the closer stitch as part of working the corners, and then the outer stitch as part of doing the next section. That's just a habit I've picked up with short connecting lines like these. You might say it's a natural aversion to doing things the official way. From there, knowing me, I will go full hybrid and just make it up as I go along, following one of these lines out and seeing where I end up. So let's see how that goes. It's actually impossible to do this central diamond in either of the official stitches. At least I think it is, but if you have a way to do that, leave me a comment and I will dedicate a whole updated video to your genius. So I'm just doing this part however I want, and then we'll switch to backstitch for the majority. At this point I gave up hunching over the space with the good lighting and nicked off to the living room instead. But hopefully you've got the gist by now. Let's meet back tomorrow when it is all complete. Okay, I am back in the proper setup and my snowflake is complete. Looking at the back of this work, it's definitely not the tidiest thing in the world due to the aforementioned making it up as I went along. For me personally, this is totally acceptable, but to you it might not be. That's totally fine, everyone has their preference, whatever makes you happy, and I only care about how this looks from the front. So, can I get a drum roll, please? But first, if you found this video helpful, please do consider giving it a thumbs up to help me out, and maybe even consider subscribing if you would like to see more crafty content. I'm always open to more tutorial ideas, so if there's something else you'd like me to cover in blackwork, cross-stitch, or any of my other million crafts, please feel free to ask and I will see what I can do. Okay, on with the reveal. Here's the completed piece. I've just left mine in this too big hoop because it's the only one I have going spare right now, but it would look really cute finished in a smaller hoop or as a hanging ornament, or probably a million other things that I'm way too uncreative to think of right now. Once again, you can grab this pattern from the link down in the video description. It's available for free, or there is the option to leave a tip, but please don't feel like that is required at all. If you do stitch this up though, I would love to see it, so please tag me if possible on Instagram. It makes my day when people do that, seriously. I hope I have managed to inspire at least one person out there to try their hand at blackwork. It really is a very satisfying form of embroidery. It's relatively quick, it's relatively easy, but people will think it took you ages and was really difficult. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Is this something you would consider giving a go? Or are you already a convert and love blackwork just as much as I do? If not, why not? That is it from me this week. I need to get back on with my mysterious Christmas crafting projects. I'll be back next week for some more crafty business, so in the meantime, have a brilliant rest of your day and keep making cool stuff. Bye!